All right, we're going to look at the sagittal section of the head and neck model in order to look at nervous system structures. So let's check out the brain up here. There are a couple things to notice. Notice that you've got the cerebrum fit inside of the skull, and the inside lining of the skull, I'm going to remove this here just so we can see, has one of the meninges, if I can get this top off here. The inside layer of this shows a white color, and that is supposed to represent the dura mater, which is a very thick sort of leathery covering around the brain and spinal cord. Okay, so I'll put this back, and we'll get back to the brain here. So the bumps that you see in the cerebrum area, which is the largest portion of the brain, are called gyri. And an individual one would be called a gyrus. The indentations are called sulci, and an individual one, would be called a sulcus. Here you can also see that there are many blood vessels that are present, and then we are getting into the area that connects the left and right cerebral hemispheres. So what you have here is only the right side of the brain, and the left and right sides of the brain naturally come apart from each other, and that is because there is a fissure here called the longitudinal fissure that would separate the two. The connection between the left and right sides of the brain is this C-shaped structure called the corpus callosum. Now, when you go just below the corpus callosum, when you go just inferior to that, you have many different structures that we want to look at. This white structure here is called the fornix, and in between the fornix and the corpus callosum is a very thin membrane, and that is called the septum pellucidum. Now, if we go below the fornix, we are in the area of the thalamus. So this is a central area of the brain. And there's actually an indentation. There's a pocket of fluid here called the third ventricle. Let's follow that pocket of fluid because there are several things we're going to be covering here. That pocket of fluid would flow downward through this little tube here. This tube is called the cerebral aqueduct. And then there's another pocket of fluid right here that is called the fourth ventricle. So you're looking at the space in between what is the brain stem, that will eventually become the spinal cord. We'll go to that in just a little bit. And back here we have the cerebellum. So the fourth ventricle is a pocket of fluid in between the brain stem and the cerebellum. You're looking at the cerebellum in cross section here. There's a natural connection between the right and left sides of the cerebellum, and that connection area is called the vermis. This has been cut away so you can see the white matter on the inside of the cerebellum, and you'll notice it sort of looks like a tree. That is called the arbor vitae, which means tree of life. So that's in the cerebellum. We'll come back up here to the central region of the brain, the thalamus area, and we'll follow it a little bit inferiorly and a little bit anteriorly, and that leads us into a little pocket called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, hypo means below, it's a little bit inferior to the thalamus, and it leads into the pituitary gland. Now, they've made this, you can take these apart, but the pituitary gland is right here, and there would be a connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which looks like a stalk, and it's called the infundibulum. All right, let's look at the brainstem area. The brainstem is going to be a connection area between the central thalamus and the spinal cord. So this white structure that you see coming all along here is the spinal cord. And I mentioned one of the meninges before, the dura mater. That would be the outer of the three meninges. Each one is called a meninx. In addition to that, covering the spinal cord, there's another thin layer that you cannot see called the arachnoid mater, but the layer that would be stuck right up against the brain tissue and the spinal cord tissue is the pia mater. It would be extremely thin and an immediate covering to these tissues. Okay, so in the brainstem area, there are three parts. The first part to always find is the pons, which sticks out. The pons is puffy. It puffs out, or it sticks out here a little bit anteriorly. That's the pons. And then you just go below it and above it. if you go below or inferior to that, that section of the brainstem is called the medulla oblongata. That extends until you get to the bottom of the cerebellum. We were just looking at the cerebellum. When you are inferior to the cerebellum, the brainstem changes to the spinal cord. Okay. Up here, we have the last portion of the brainstem. This area is called the midbrain or mesencephalon, and it's got several areas to it that we need to look at. This soft kind of curve up here, so it's just below the thalamus, this is called the cerebral peduncle. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cross over past the cerebral aqueduct, and we're going to come back here to the tectal plate area. And you're only looking at the right side, but this would extend to the left side, and when you look at the back side of it, you have 4 bumps. These are called the corpora quadrigemina, quad for 4, Gemini because we're going to have twins. There is an upper bump and a lower bump on each side. The upper bumps are called superior colliculi, and the lower bumps are called inferior colliculi. And then one more structure that is very close to this is the pineal gland. So what you want to do is take your thalamus and you go all the way to the back side of the thalamus, and that is the pineal gland. So that is going to be just superior to the superior colliculi, pineal gland.